if I could sum you up, one, you're an entrepreneur, first and foremost. Two, I think, the official title then is that you're an independent consultant that works with human branding, corporate branding, and corporate culture.
The conversation around your employer brand is happening whether you choose to participate in it or not. We exist in a very competitive talent market. Graphic design or, paid media campaigns, that doesn't mean that you can't have an awesome employer brand. You just need to have a powerful story and the wherewithal to find unique and creative ways to be able to tell it. Having a rural area where there's not a super deep talent pool, you have to start thinking outside of the box and how can we leverage our specific narrative and our story to access and draw in more people who may not be aware of us.
Hi, Chelsea. Thank you so much for joining us this morning as we're talking about the Business Catalyst Supports Program, and really excited to dive into your business, Drift Consulting, and learning all about what it is that you do and why you felt like this was such a needed organization. My name is Heather Thompson. I am excited to be your host this morning and have this conversation with you. Based on my research, just to start, let me know if I'm missing anything. I would say, if I could sum you up, one, you're an entrepreneur, first and foremost. Two, I think, the official title then is that you're an independent consultant that works with human branding, corporate branding, and corporate culture. Your extensive history with working with very large organizations such as Canadian Tire, Target, as well as CIBC. I can't wait to dive into this conversation.
Absolutely, me too. Employer branding is an incredibly nuanced discipline and it's going to show up differently from company to company. So I actually prefer to think of employer branding as an audience segmentation strategy. So instead of marketing to your consumers or your clients or whoever, you're marketing to your talent. So it's just a different way of imagining your corporate brand. So when I go into an organization to develop an employer brand, we always ensure that brand marketing as the team is at the table as a core stakeholder to make sure that we're having that continuous experience. We're not confusing candidates or consumers by creating something that feels completely different than the corporate brands. You need a multi-channel strategy, so you need to think about where you're showing up. You need to have great content. You need to have brand advocates. So there are core components to an employer brand that are mainstays, and a lot of them mirror really closely what you would find in a traditional consumer-facing marketing strategy. It's just we have the unique challenge of marketing to talent. So I tend to think of employer branding as an audience segmentation strategy. It's not its own brand. The employer brand and the company brand, they really do exist in symbiosis. It's a really holistic company narrative that serves as a way to communicate to your future employees.
That distinction is so excellent around the employer branding, because you're right, it gives the illusion or potentially the inclination that it's okay, well, now I have to do a separate brand. And it's that's not it even a little bit. It's working with what is already existing, but telling a different story for a different audience. And so I think that's a really good distinction to make.
The conversation around your employer brand is happening whether you choose to participate in it or not. We exist in a very competitive talent market, and you really need to differentiate yourself. So this is a model that I use a lot to communicate about employer branding and all of the different components of a great employer brand. I call it the employer brand iceberg because obviously we know that whatever it is, 90% of an iceberg is below the surface. 90% of an employer brand is your internal culture, and certain aspects of that will never make their way out into the talent marketplace. It's the job of the employer brand to really distill all of that information in a creative, compelling, interesting, motivating, inspiring way to tell your story to candidates. So the environment that the employer brand exists in is the external talent marketplace. The employer brand strategy is the way that you tell the story, the dynamic mix of platforms and modes of messaging. And then the employer, your reputation as an employer is the outcome and the output of whatever your employer brand and its associated strategy ends up being. So becoming competitive is about recognizing all of this and taking control of that narrative and taking control of your employer brand, because people are talking about what it's like to work at your company all the time, whether it's online, whether it's word of mouth. It's up to you whether you choose to engage and exert any kind of control or influence over how that conversation is happening.
It's really interesting when you were saying like culture's happening anyways. There's a narrative. And I think that's one of those things where it's kind of like that junk drawer potentially, where it's like, if I just don't acknowledge it, maybe it's not there. And I think that's a really interesting point around how it is there.
For sure. And if you think about review platforms, that's kind of like the digital version of word of mouth. So this is just a PSA that I want to put out there, because I think that there is a little bit of a misperception around the impact and the act of employer branding, that it's going to cost you a ton of money. It's this thing that's going to take a lot of time and you need a big team to do it. You absolutely do not need a large team or a big budget to do employer branding. What you need is passion and a team that's willing to kind of go out on a limb and allow some risks to be taken in terms of how you tell your story. And, you can have one really fired up, passionate person doing it on your team. You can spread the job amongst whoever you have. If you're running a lean operation, if you're a smaller organization and you don't have a ton of marketing dollars to invest in graphic design or paid media campaigns, that doesn't mean that you can't have an awesome employer brand. You just need to have a powerful story and the wherewithal to find unique and creative ways to be able to tell it.
As people are looking at different jobs and different opportunities, that connection point it looks different than traditionally has for really the last 50 years.
The things that are going to work for a Toronto or a Vancouver or a Montreal, they aren't necessarily going to work for a smaller town or a region where the talent pool just isn't that deep and you don't have thousands and thousands of candidates just outside your doorstep. And I have an example of how we used this really effectively back when I was inside a corporate employer brand team, and we were running different strategies. And this particular organization had branches all over Canada in rural markets, and we were trying to find ways to attract skilled labor into these rural markets. And what we ended up doing was running a social media campaign that really highlighted and capitalized on the beauty of the regions that that our branches were located in. And it spoke to a subset of the talent population that was really looking for a lifestyle shift and was looking for an opportunity to come home, so to speak, and move to a place where there was a little bit of a slower pace of life. They were surrounded by natural beauty. They loved, hiking, and it was a really, we played on that lifestyle type marketing. And you see it so often in consumer facing marketing. You're not marketing the product, you're marketing the lifestyle. We took that and we applied it to talent. And we were actually able to attract a number of really high quality candidates who were interested in relocating to more rural areas. And we did it by amplifying characteristics of the culture of the organization, complemented with characteristics of the places and the surroundings and the areas that they were located in to draw in a different type of candidate. So that is an example of kind of the creative thinking that you really have to engage in when it comes to all aspects of employer branding and solving these specific challenges and having a rural area where there's not a super deep talent pool. You have to start thinking outside of the box and how can we leverage our specific narrative and our story to access and draw in more people who may not be aware of us.
This is a really important distinction, that there are so many things to highlight that people are looking for that I think, especially when we're in it day in, day out, that we might overlook. So really highlighting those sort of creative components that if somebody is working downtown Toronto, maybe they do want to move up north and have that different sort of pace of life. And we see that all the time. We're seeing, record level of migration and immigration moving around the country right now. And what are some of those external factors that will actually bring in people, not just necessarily for the job, but for all of the things that come with it?
So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. How do we open new talent pipelines for more challenging geographies? Now, I know compensation always tops the lists as the number one motivator, right? And that makes sense. But it's not the only motivator. Increasingly, it's not the only motivator, especially for the younger generations, especially for the gig economy and the way that the world is going right now in terms of the talent marketplace. Yes, people want to be paid and compensated fairly for the work that they're doing, but culture is a huge driver of work experience, and how the culture of your organization aligns to their goals and their values and how they identify as a person is a massive indicator for people of, do I want to work for this organization, and can I see myself there long term? Is this organization worth moving for? Another example that I'll give, where it was actually on the East Coast, and I was running a recruitment marketing campaign on the East Coast of Canada, and some smaller towns and rural outports, trying to get talent to come out there was a real challenge. So one of the things that we noticed when we were doing market research was that a lot of the job applications that were being filled out weren't necessarily being filled out by candidates themselves. It was being filled out by their parents or their grandparents, who were trying to get people to come home and relocate back to their roots. And there was this trend within the recruitment data when we looked at it that, people were relocating back and taking jobs because they wanted to go back to their roots and put down foundations in a place where they had grown up. So one of the taglines and the creative concepts that we developed for this recruitment marketing campaign was to kind of come home and come back to your roots. And that proved to be really successful for us because it captured the attention and the imagination of a subset of this talent pool that was really looking for that opportunity. And obviously, you would test and look at other concepts, but it's going back to that human-centric experience and what are people looking for, and what is the story that you need to tell, and what is going to motivate people, and finding unique ways to build your employer brand strategy around that.
Anytime I hear parents are involved in any sort of application, I just have to laugh because it's so funny to me that this still happens. And you know what? I would do the same thing. I'm not going to lie. Like, if my kids didn't live near me and I found some sort of experience or something that would bring them home, I would do it in a heartbeat.
It's not optional to not engage in some form of employer branding if you have skilled positions that you're looking to fill. If you have talent needs in the next year, you should be considering employer branding. The post and pray method and reactive recruiting, it's costing companies thousands, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's creating these vacuums within organizations that need to be filled. And a way to fill that is to have a consistent pipeline of high quality talent that you're kind of cultivating and keeping warm. But that's really, really hard to do in this economy and in this type of talent marketplace.
As you're saying this, I'm just thinking, like, it makes rational sense, right? Like, if we're talking about the team, we're talking about our bottom line, we're talking about all the things that make a good organization run successfully. It's like, this just seems like an obvious thing to do.
We need to talk about how employer branding can help in some of those tangible, real ways. Really, I always say there's, three kind of stages of employer branding, and they show up very similar to how a traditional marketing funnel would show up. So there's awareness and consideration, there's education and knowledge gathering or cultivating, and then there's the conversion level right down at the very bottom. At the awareness stage of employer branding, which is super important, you're really just trying to get people to think about you in a slightly different way than they did before. So where a potential candidate maybe didn't know you existed or knew you existed but hadn't considered you as an option for their future career, you're trying to initiate that mind shift where now they are thinking about your company like, oh yeah, it seems like they're doing some interesting things there. And then you build on that initial moment of connection with your subsequent campaigns and content and employer brand strategy. Another thing that employer brand can help out with is aligning candidate expectations around things like hybrid and flexible work, development of your skills, training, family and parental leave, things that they would be able to avail themselves of within your organization that are part of your employee value proposition that may position you uniquely as compared to your competitors. You really want to take that values-based approach because candidates are taking a values-based approach more than ever before in our current marketplace. It's been proven that organizations with great employer brands have reduced turnover. They also have stronger levels of engagement that stems from the pride and affinity and purpose that goes hand in hand with seeing your culture narrative out there. It has reverberating impacts for the whole talent process and the whole recruitment experience. So not only does it create cost efficiencies because you're getting better people faster, having that streamlined, continuous brand experience brings in culture-aligned candidates who are more ready to hit the ground running when they finally join your organization.
Expectation management, I think, is really crucial. And I think it's super important because I've been on the employee side of a bait and switch. And it was one of the worst experiences of my life. Like, I cried all the time, and it was not at all what I was sold on when I left. From an employer standpoint, holding people accountable to really what that job looks like is so simple when you're managing expectations. So if you can say something like, we are a culture of feedback, we are a culture of high performance management, I think right off the get-go, like, that allows people to anticipate, okay, I'm going to have feedback all the time. Okay, this is a fast-paced, high-performance space. And I think that will allow employers and employees to just come to this sort of arrangement and just say, okay, this is a good fit for me, this isn't. That's a win-win for everyone.
Allowing people to go into a situation with their eyes open is super powerful in terms of ensuring future engagement and retention and garnering, I think, the respect of your candidates that you are courageous enough to put it out there. You know, what is the real story? What's the authentic story? But we do know that it does improve cost efficiency in the recruitment process. LinkedIn obviously has a lot of influence and a lot of vested interest in the employer brand conversation. So they've done studies and they have found that overall companies with weaker employer brands report a cost per hire that's almost double that of companies with a strong employer brand. Some of the ways that it actually reduces the cost is it helps you attract passive candidates. It increases employee referral because it increases the sense of pride that current employees feel. People are more likely to, send this social post or point out that bus ad or, share the content around your employer brand with their network. You tend to get a better quality of candidate, someone who's already dialed into your culture, already a 10 out of 10 in terms of how much they want to work for you. Enhanced candidate experience because they're engaged the entire time. That's the goal, is that from that first touch point, whether it's your career site or a piece of social content or an ad they hear on the radio, right up until they accept that offer, you've created a brand aligned experience. And then reduce your dependency on recruiting agencies, which can be extremely, extremely expensive. And a lot of times not as effective as you would want them to be when it comes to placing a candidate who's actually going to stay with you. So those are just some of the ways that you can see employer branding and the investment in telling your story in that authentic, compelling way will, over time, it's not instantaneous, But over time, that investment will lead to reduced costs, efficiencies, and streamlining your whole recruitment and talent process.
As soon as you said working with a recruiter, I just saw dollar signs. We need to respect and acknowledge that there's so much stock that people put into this that if we're just throwing out your run-of-the-mill job posting, it's not going to motivate the right talent to make that leap, because what we're asking them to do is really overhaul their life. If we're going to make that pool not necessarily deeper but more intentional, we have to make sure we're kind of pulling on those levers to do so.
So let's talk a little bit about the power of storytelling and the power of story when it comes to engaging and retaining your candidates. As we know now, a strong employer brand tells the story of your culture in a compelling way. When candidates connect with your company throughout their recruitment experience, and that goes into onboarding and those first 6 to 12 months, they will be more engaged and stay longer. So it's really putting that focus and that rigor around the experiential component, not just in getting them in the door. The idea is that your candidates will eventually become your advocates. And when you can plant those seeds early and keep people engaged and interested throughout the recruitment process, and then keep that up throughout the different stages of their employment with you, it creates this really holistic experience that makes people want to stick around longer. We know that employees are more likely to refer and share open positions when there's a strong employer brand associated with it, or when there's a relatable story behind it. We know that candidates that come through referrals are more likely to stay longer and be more engaged. This is an age-old metric that rings through most talent acquisition teams. Referral employees are like gold because they just stay longer and they tend to be a better fit, a better culture fit. And then we look at something called earned media value. So that is the commensurate amount of media dollars that you would have to spend in order to get the impact of employee advocacy. So it's off the charts. You would have to pay tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars in pay-per-click advertising to get the impact of just a few employee advocates.
You're right. The impact it's so genuine, right? Because people wouldn't do that if they didn't really mean it.
That's not just, for us, that's across all industries and sectors and role types. People are just more interested and more likely to click through and explore if it comes from a real human being who they can identify with in some way. The system just kind of works. So you really are setting something up to continually evolve, but be that almost self-sustaining ecosystem. That's what a really great mature employer brand strategy should look and feel like at the end of the day.
I'm curious to get your 2 cents on how do organizations balance this? Because I also have seen this firsthand where a candidate, yes, they're qualified, but their lists of, what they want out of this, it's too much. And I feel like we run the risk of being too accommodating. So how do we reconcile that?
It comes down to being confident and a values-driven organization and knowing what you have to offer and finding creative ways to communicate that. And if there is a great candidate, doing everything that you can, but ultimately you have to be comfortable with where you draw the line and what you can bring to the table. And if a certain candidate can't see their way clear to joining your organization with what you have on the table and what you have to offer, then they're not the candidate for you.
And again, I just want to thank you for your time and all your expertise.
My pleasure. This was really fun. I really enjoyed it.